Well, I'd like to thank everyone for coming to the talk. We'll go ahead and start off right into it. So we're talking about digital crisis readiness and how am I somewhat qualified to give this presentation. I'm currently a PhD student in computer science at the University of Maryland, College Park. I have about 17 years experience in IT and InfoSec, 10 years of federal experience, and concurrently about 6 years doing consulting in the nonprofit realm. The presentation I'm giving today are my experiences, my own opinions throughout, and just some observations that I've seen where businesses are falling short in preparing for data breaches and how we can get ahead of uncertainty and prepare ourselves. So, starting off, and not that I'm advocating for this, but if someone were to pull the fire alarm right now, I imagine about 99.9% of us would make it, to the front lobby successfully. And why is this? Well, since we were small children, we did fire drills. Why? Well, because a fire in a building is a catastrophic event that might happen to you throughout your lifetime. So, accordingly, we prepare for that inevitability if it happens. So, we do this through rehearsals. And a lot of time we do fire drills, we don't know if it's the real thing, and we don't know if it's just a drill. So it's in our best interest for survival for us to expeditiously walk, not run, out of the building to a safe distance, and let the authorities come in and deal with it. Keep this analogy in the back of your head as we come in and talk about cyber readiness. But we're going to start off with a little history lesson going back to 2012. We have the Saudi oil company, Saudi Aramco, that was affected by the Shamoon malware, which wiped 35,000 computers clean. And this is a significant company that deals with 9.4 million barrels of oil production daily. So this particular vulnerability they had in their systems and the subsequent wiping of their systems had global implications. Fast forward 2 years to 2014, we see the Sony Pictures hack around the time the movie The Interview was released. Went in there. Sony paid $15 million to deal with that intrusion. And one interesting aspect I'd like to highlight is that it was some IT technician that was stumbling around in the basement of their headquarters and found a pallet of unused Blackberries that still worked. These unused Blackberries still had connectivity to their secure servers, whereas the malware had completely wiped out their corporate net, but these Blackberries were still good to go. Nowhere in a disaster continuity plan was there a place for these Blackberries. They were just cotton-balled and kept in storage. But thankfully to this IT technician, Sony was able to come back up and continue operations with internal and external communications. The real kick here is that the malware that affected Sony was a variant of Shamoon, which we had seen 2 years prior. If anyone's familiar with reverse engineering techniques, this was completely unsophisticated malware. Everything was unencrypted. Over-the-wire net analysis or host-based intrusion detection should have caught this. But they didn't, and they subsequently had to pay $15 million to come back from this. Additionally, in 2014, we saw Heartbleed, which was an OpenSSL vulnerability that allowed malicious actors to gain access to server memory, and in that memory had legitimate user credentials. So with those legitimate credentials, a bad actor could do whatever they want on those servers. One interesting thing I'd like to highlight with Heartbleed is this measurement study of patch rates. Once it was an end day, once we knew that there was a patch available for Heartbleed, I'd like to bring your attention to the plateau that occurred between the 9th and about the 23rd of April that year. Does anyone want to take a shot at what happened during this plateau? It was the weekend. Yeah. So here we have 4% approximately of the public-facing internet that was susceptible to this malware and didn't apply the patch because of the weekend. And then so we can, predict that, the next time something like this happens and we don't have the policies in place that allow us to bring personnel on-prem throughout the weekend and deal with these critical vulnerabilities, we're going to have another situation like this. So the tagline for this presentation is that when you actually have a crisis within your organization, it shouldn't be exploratory learning at that time. So how do we get ahead of uncertainty? And my proposal is using this amazing GIF. This is Jean-Claude Van Damme in the 1980s in the movie Bloodsport, where he's a kickboxer preparing for the Kumite, fight to the death, and winner takes all. And what he's doing as a kickboxer is banging his shins against a bamboo tree, causing microfractures in his shin. And over time, those microfractures are going to heal, essentially turning his leg into a flying baseball bat. And this is what I propose organizations do. Turn your legs into flying baseball bats. No. It's harden your own environment through self-inflicted adversity so that you become better prepared for when data breaches happen to you. And I believe this is possible through 3 tenets that we'll talk through more in depth, starting with one of the most controversial ones, and that's actually doing training in your production environment. Why do I advocate for this? So there are 2 current gold standards for cybersecurity training. One of which is where we'll send our technicians off into, we'll spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to send them across the nation to go sit in a lab in a scripted environment against a threat that may or may not be relevant against your particular environment, using a system they've never touched before, and also tools that they may or may not be familiar with. So we're going to spend these hundreds of thousands of dollars to invest in cyber readiness. And they're going to develop these ephemeral processes that will absolutely vanish once they leave that on-site training and come back to your corporate environment and start using the tools they're familiar with and the processes they're more comfortable with. These virtual training opportunities are better than nothing, but they're doing us a great disservice. And then we also have these tabletop exercises, which we'll send our senior leaders away to. They'll sit around a table and those choose your own adventure novels you had when you were a kid. That's essentially what we're doing here. We're talking well, you're experiencing A, so what do you do in this particular event? And if you choose to go to page 38, then you go further down that rabbit hole. And in these, they have a critical vulnerability in that you're disconnecting your leadership from the technicians. And training cybersecurity readiness in your own environment allows you to bridge that gap. And most importantly, if you're inducing a vulnerability within your own environment, that means it's possible and viable and something that you should be prepared for, otherwise it wouldn't be in your environment. And lastly, the tools and processes that we come up with during these events are going to have longevity. These are something that we can go back to in the event that we ever encounter something like this again. It's not going to be, oh yeah, I remember that one time we used that tool I'd never heard of before. It's going to be, the last time we saw this, we did X, Y, and Z. The next proposal is one of my big bugaboos. A lot of organizations have annual external penetration testing requirements. And I'll ask them, so what is involved in this penetration test? And with that, they'll tell me, well, we'll allow some external entity to come in, plug into our internal network, run some automated scanner where they enumerate what they can of our network, print out this real pretty list of critical vulnerabilities all the way down to low impact, and that's the end of it. And in no way is that a penetration test. That's a vulnerability assessment. And there are so many false positives and false negatives associated with these. It requires an interactive session to go in and verify these findings. You don't know at the end of the day if a critical vulnerability truly is critical within your environment until something has gone in and validated it. And also there might be some mid-level vulnerabilities that actually give you the keys to the kingdom through second, third order effects. So then we look at scoped penetration tests. And what does that mean? A lot of organizations will say, hey, everything in this green circle, we're cool with you coming in and assessing. But under no circumstance are you to look at this red square. These are the most valuable assets in our company, and if you touch it and we have any sort of downtime or corruption, anything like that, that's just unacceptable loss for us as an organization. So let's rewind that tape a little bit. We're paying external entities to come in and create blind spots in our organizations, and we're not only cool with this, this is something we advocate for. So the fix to this is allowing organizations to conduct full scope penetration tests against your organization. And let's shatter that red box, because when an adversary comes into your network, they're not limited by any scope on contract. They don't have to sign an NDA. They're going to do a smash and grab and get exactly what they came in for. So let's put ourselves on equal footing with an adversary, identify our own vulnerabilities, and proactively stop them before an adversary gets in the network. So a lot of smaller organizations simply say, hey, we can't afford external pen tests. There's been immense returns on investment of bug bounty programs. A colleague of mine at the University of Maryland, we just finished a study where we talked to 28 software testers and hackers. And a lot of them said they're not in it for the money. The reason they do bug bounty programs is just out of sheer fun. Or if they do get money out of it, they'll donate it to charity. Or they're perfectly cool with getting a t-shirt that says they participated in it. So that's zero investment on your behalf, and you're getting back immeasurable benefits from people that want to help you before an adversary gets to the same target. So something else I'd like to bring up of a mindset that I think is absolutely right within industry is Netflix, and they have Chaos Monkey. And that's exactly what you think it is. They have a tool that is interconnected throughout their network and allows them to go in, induce jitter on a connection, turn off this server. Let's see what happens when we do this. And once they're able to do that and something fails, they see that as an opportunity. That's something they can focus their time and resources against to add robustness to the services they provide to their customers. In that mindset, they don't have a red box. So in the security field, I believe that we readily need to adopt that mindset when we're going into full scope penetration tests. When we're allowing bug bounty programs, people outside the network to come in, that's crowdsourcing full enumeration of your external attack surface. And if they're able to get in, they're also able to see what an insider could possibly do to harm your organization. So bringing this all together for the first two tenets, what I'm advocating for, no notice, full scope penetration attacks on production environment. And that's a very uncomfortable thing for a lot of people to hear. But if we're really committed to stopping crises before they occur, and we want to have the calcification in our bones and within our own external network, our own internal networks, this is something that we need to adopt. And lastly, I want to talk about learning from the past. In this picture, we have a photo of troops engaged in combat in Afghanistan against insurgents. And I want to ask, how did these individuals get here? Not from a policy perspective, not like why did they get deployed, but how did they get from citizens to fighting on the front lines of Afghanistan? And they're able to leverage centuries of westernized warfare to identify what exactly they need to focus on to prepare them for combat in this particular circumstance. And a lot of that looks like this, a playbook. They've identified, hey, when you deploy and you're going to engage in troops in combat, or you're going to engage with an adversary, these particular things are the most likely that you're going to encounter. And so because of that high probability, we're going to spend hundreds, if not thousands of hours preparing you to react to this. So when you have this particular circumstance occur, it's muscle memory at that point. You're just reacting. It's just another day. And the concept of stress inoculation comes into play where, we've seen it so many times. It's just like the fire drill. We've done it so many times. Let's just do it one more time. But on the flip side, if we don't have that sort of muscle memory, inaction can be the difference between life and death in combat. But in your environment, inaction can exacerbate a crisis to make it exponentially worse. What I'm not advocating for with the development of a playbook is any sort of mindless, reaction. What I'm advocating for is putting actions into motion that allow us to better assess the situation and come up with a course of action that will mitigate the threat that we have at hand. Developing playbooks is a way to get after that. And we have an invaluable opportunity with all of the vulnerability disclosure programs, bug bounty programs, even the news. We see all these different inputs of things that are happening to other organizations. And that's the same thing that, Western militaries have done for the past couple centuries, where we identify the most likely things that could happen to us and building a playbook to prevent that from ever happening or to responding better to it. So this is a very OODA loop-ish looking slide, but it's putting all three tenets together. Again, starting from the top, advocating for no notice, full scope penetration attacks against your production environment. Observing what happens within your own environment. Did the security team notice it? If they did, how long did it take them to respond? What actions did they take afterwards? And then from that, We can assess it. Yes, you did this immediately after, you did Y after X, but was that the right decision to make? And from this, we're able to codify a living document that measures, state-of-the-art responses to how organizations should respond to threats. Had Sony done this, a variant of the same exact malware would not have caused $15 million of damage to them. So by assessing, we can adapt our organizations. There's the example of the weekend, not having policies in place to bring in people for overtime. Or there's also, as an organization, we need to be able to communicate effectively from leadership down to technicians, and also the inverse. How well do technicians communicate to senior leaders? And that's a huge issue in itself, in that, going back to the Heartbleed example, had a technician be able to effectively communicate to C-level executives, hey, this is a bad thing that could happen to us over this weekend if we don't have this patch in place, then 4% of the internet might have not been susceptible to that attack over the weekend. And then, so in my experience, I've seen a few companies actually make it out to the adapt portion, and even fewer actually measure the effectiveness of those adaptations by re-engaging after the fact. Yeah, we changed ourselves as an organization, but were those the right things that we should have done? And by rerunning a scenario, you're able to build that muscle memory within your security team, and you're able to assess the effectiveness of the changes you made. Was it successful? Did you perform the actions you should have? Did you do it well? Maybe. And if not, we're able to continually go through the cycle and refine our processes so we have this living document. And this living document is not only good for one particular team, it also helps with knowledge transfer, in that you have this breadth of knowledge. If you stand up a new branch somewhere else on a remote site, hey, these are the 5 years of best practices that we were able to come up with. Here you go, you're welcome. And as organizations start to build information sharing coalitions, if you will, this is also something that corporations can do for knowledge sharing with a particular threat. When you have indicators of compromise being shared, you can also share these particular tactics for mitigating the malware with those IOCs. So a lot of people say, well, we simply cannot risk our production environment to do security testing. It's just something we're not interested in. And my rebuttal to that is, how much is your security worth to you when the inevitability happens and you do have that data breach? Are you willing to spend $15 million after the fact? Or maybe a fraction of that to prepare for it? It's kind of an easy choice. So some of you might be, oh, dude, you just rambled for about 20 minutes and didn't provide a single piece of evidence. I'm working on it. So if any of you or your organizations are willing to collaborate on doing this in an environment, we have one major organization signed up, and we're looking at the effectiveness of it in various environments. So if you'd like to collaborate, I'd do it for free in exchange for the ability to publish findings. So if you want to talk about it, here's my contact info, and I'm also open for any questions you may have right now. Appreciate it.
If you have any questions, please come up to the microphone, so for the benefit of the recording. No? No one? All right. Well, thank you, Rock Stevens. The man with an amazing